Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and this is going to be another guide for League of Legends. This time we're going to be focusing on compositions and matchups, so learning how to choose champions that will benefit your team and perform well against the enemy team. So this is a very, very complicated topic because there are obviously just a ton of different options and different strategies for approaching both your own composition and the enemy composition. So there are a lot of different people that are very intelligent about compositions and about league theory that would have different opinions about this stuff. So, if there's something that, you think could be done in a different way, that's probably true. It could be done in a different way. But I'm just going to try to offer you some suggestions for ways to think about compositions, to think about your picks, so that the goal is you don't only just sort of parrot what I do here. You don't just copy the kind of strategy that I use, but you develop your own critical thinking about picking so that you can make your own strategies and come up with different systems that work for you. So I'm just see this video as a way of getting the conversation started, in other words. So if you haven't thought critically about these things before, this will hopefully give you some things to think about, whether you agree or disagree with how I approach different situations. But let's go ahead and get in here. Sorry, I got some dust or something. My nose is itching there. Why are compositions important? Okay, so especially if you want to move up in ELO and really take ranked seriously, you need to be able to pick good compositions. At lower ELOs, you can get away sometimes with just playing whatever you want, any kind of champion that may not necessarily be correct in certain situations in terms of optimal play, but can work simply based on the strength of your own knowledge with the champion or of your macro knowledge. So if you just ward correctly, rotate correctly, and just make good decisions about team fights in low ELO, you could probably get away with supporting with any number of things. You probably win with like an Urgot support, right? If you just do that kind of basic stuff correctly. But you are handicapping yourself if you do that. If you play a suboptimal champion into a composition, if you just play whatever champion you really like to play and it's not optimal, you are in some ways handicapping yourself. Now, it is true that you should play champions that you're comfortable with, that you're familiar with, but in general, you need to try to become comfortable and familiar with things that are good in a variety of compositions. That's my advice to you. If you want to gain ELO and you want to take rank seriously, you need to understand compositions and try to pick accordingly. So, some champions are just going to be more powerful than others in a certain meta, and that's just how it is. It might depend on which items are really powerful at the time. So, for example, as of this video, as you can see, it just started the new year, 2017. This is patch, I don't think it's 7.1 yet. It's basically the very beginning of Season 7. Redemption and Locket are overpowered right now as support. And so a lot of what determines what's really good in the current meta is which champions can utilize those items very well. So earlier in 2016, before they nerfed... I can't even remember Frost Queen's Claim. It's been so long since it's been out of the meta. Before they nerfed that, then a lot of AP supports that could really utilize that item were very, very strong. But since they've nerfed that item, then AP supports, earlier in the year kind of fell out of favor in some respects. So it's really important to understand that just conceptually, some champions are going to be better than others. And that's just how it is in certain metas, depending on the items, which other champions are good, which champions complement those champions. So, for example, Kalista was very good in 2016 as well. Alistar is extremely good with Kalista, and so Alistar was a very strong champion when Kalista was in the meta. In that same meta, Kindred was very good, and Alistar was very good against Kindred because you could knock people out of the circle before it healed them. So certain champions are better in certain metas for different reasons, and that's just how it is. So it's just important to recognize that when you're choosing your champions and metas, and that you need to be able to adapt, you need to be able to change champions and sort of practice different champions if you really want to consistently do well in ranked over the years. Okay, I just talked about synergies of different items and champions, and some supports or any champion are better in different styles according to the map as well. So right now, junglers get a ton of experience, they level up very quickly, and their items are very powerful. So champions that can scale up with a lot of gold are really strong right now. So Hecarim, for example, because the jungle offers a ton of gold, a ton of ganking opportunities, and such, Hecarim is very, very strong right now. Courage of the Colossus is another example. It's a super powerful mastery right now, and so champions that can use Courage of the Colossus are at a major advantage. So Vi is at a major advantage because one of Vi's weaknesses is if she built damage in the past, she could get blown up really easily after she initiated. But because she has Courage now on top of her normal shield, then she's actually quite tanky with no tank items, and so that makes her very powerful. Similarly, Nautilus is extremely good right now in the support role because almost everything he does procs Courage of the Colossus, and that's an extremely powerful mastery, so that's just something to keep in mind as well. Okay, but in general, there are themes that run throughout that I think are universal that make for good champions for solo queue, regardless of the meta, regardless of what's going on. So if there's something that I don't talk about in this video, and of course there will be, right? There's over 100 champions. I can't talk about every single champion, right? But this will give you something conceptually to think about when you're analyzing meta champions or thinking about champions that maybe aren't meta right now that could be. So if you're trying to, dig through the coal mine and find some gems and think about new champions and new roles, these are things you want to keep in mind. So the number one thing to think about in solo queue is that it's chaos, it's chaotic, and riddled with mistakes. That means that a lot of times what people call the clown fiesta breaks out now, where people are just constantly running around, not thinking about structured team fights, not really paying attention to their mini-maps, not really thinking about different game states, like who is strong at which point based on which items and things like that. It stays that way even into low diamond, which is the highest that I've been at the current juncture. The highest I was in Season 6 was in promos for Diamond 4. So that happens even at higher elos, and that happens even more at lower elos. So just understand, there's going to be chaos. People are going to make a lot of mistakes. That's just solo queue. That's how it works. You need to pick champions that are very good in that kind of environment. So just understand, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and your allies are going to make a lot of mistakes, and the enemies are going to make a lot of mistakes. So you want to think about, okay, well, if people are making all these mistakes, I should pick champions that can capitalize in that type of environment. So you want to pick forgiving champions and forgiving compositions. So things where if you make a mistake, you're not going to get punished really hard for it. And you want to have something that can punish enemy mistakes. So if they're out of position, if they're making mistakes, you can really capitalize, snap them up, kill them, get an advantage. So these are two aspects of the clown fiesta that you want to think about when you're building compositions. Okay. So here are, I think I had 6 principles for how to really capitalize on this clown fiesta. Okay, number 1 rule, pick champions with engage and crowd control. That stuns, slows to a lesser extent, just champions that can get in there and make action happen. They can make plays happen. Now, not every champion has to do this, but these are some of the best champions in solo queue, right? So right now, we look at Hecarim. Why is he really good? Well, part of it's because he starts fights. Vi starts fights. Lux can start fights. I'm not a huge fan of Lux in the current meta, but that's something that she can definitely do. Nautilus starts fights. Malzahar starts fights. So a lot of the most powerful champions know how to start fights, and that's really important because then if someone's out of position, you can actually attack them, go on them, start a fight, end it, and then that's how you win the game. So also, crowd control helps neutralize threats and erase mistakes. So for example, if the enemy team has an 8-1 Katarina, that can be a major problem. But if your team has multiple forms of CC, like let's say you have a Malzahar in the middle, you have a Malachi top lane, and you have something like a Nautilus in the jungle, or Nautilus bottom lane rather, and a Vi in the jungle. That's 4 different champions with a lot of CC. So when Katarina tries to go in with her 8-1, if you crowd control her enough, it's not going to matter how much gold she has because she's going to blow up. So that's, even though someone may have fed and given this Katarina 4 free kills in lane, if you did a good job of picking your composition and you pick something with crowd control, you could actually have a fighting chance against her later on, even though she has a huge gold advantage. Also, crowd control is very easy for your teammates to understand. When someone's stunned, they know how to go in and fight. Versus if someone's split pushing, then your teammates may not necessarily know, okay, how do I not fight? How do I stay safe? How do I not get engaged on while this Trundle split pushes a side lane? That's really difficult for people to do conceptually. Even though it seems like it wouldn't be hard, you have 4 people, they have 5 people right there, don't fight. It happens all the time. I mean, we've all been there, right? It's just really hard to make it happen if you try to win the game with split pushing or poke compositions, where you're just waiting on that Lux to hit a bind, or you're just waiting on Ziggs to get a couple of bombs on people before you fight. It's not happening in solo queue. Someone's going to rush in there, or they're going to get too close and the enemy's going to jump on them. So crowd control is something that people can understand. So when you go in with your Nautilus hook or your Thresh hook or your Blitzcrank hook or whatever, they know what that means. They know it's time to fight. They know to go. They know to engage. So it's just easier for people to understand in solo queue. Crowd control, if you have defensive crowd control, so peel, then you can help allies who are out of position. So if there's that one Jinx that's just always out of position, if you have someone like a Tahm Kench or a Janna, you can actually save them from dying because you have enough anti-crowd control, if you want to think of it like that, in order to get people out of those kinds of situations. So examples of champions that are really good at this type of thing that I'm talking about are Nautilus, Malzahar, Janna, Leona, Hecarim, and Vi. Now, Janna's the one that stands out because she can't engage, but she has so much disengage. She has so much peel. She has so much of a safety net for allies that she still deserves to be mentioned in this category of crowd control, even though she doesn't have the engage side of that equation as much. Okay, number 2, durable champions. So really tough champions, tanky champions. Tanky champions help make your engage more smooth. So if you have a tanky champion and you go in and try to fight, they can beat on you for a couple of seconds and give your allies time to get there to make plays. So, for example, let's say that you're Nautilus and you hook to engage and then you start fighting. But for some reason, I don't know, like let's say you're fighting in your own jungle, you start fighting, and your Caitlyn's trying to get red buff at 25 minutes or something like that. And instead of immediately going to the fight, Caitlyn gets those last 3 auto attacks to finish the red buff before she goes to the fight. Well, if you're Nautilus, you might actually be able to survive for her to show up. Or maybe you're counting on your ally to teleport in, and they forget to do it for a couple of seconds. Then you're giving them time to make a mistake and still win the fight. Whereas if you're someone who tries to engage that's not very tanky, let's say you're trying to flash in as Riven and, you know, do a bunch of damage to people and your team doesn't follow up and you die, it's because you're not tanky enough. So it allows for longer reaction times by your allies to do the right thing. It allows you to be out of position too. So if you make mistakes, if you get caught out with someone who's tanky, it'll give your allies a chance to come back and help you out. So for example, let's say you're just walking up the river. Let me pull up a map here. I always like to have this map handy. I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong in there. That's okay. There we go. Let's go ahead and pull this up. This will help me out. What the hell? Can we zoom in? View image. Okay, there we go. Alright, so let's say that... Dang, this is like Windows 95 or something here. Look at that load time. Holy cow. Alright. Interesting. So, let's say that you're walking up this river here as Nautilus, and you're trying to ward. Let's say you're trying to go into there and just ward this area right here. Because you're Nautilus, let's say the jungler, like, pops out of this bush when you're right here, and they start fighting you. Now, because you have an escape as Nautilus, you can attack him, stun him, and maybe, like, hook to get over to here. But then he's still going to be hitting you and harassing you, and the mid laner might even rotate down and help you. But if you're tanky like Nautilus and you have an escape where you can get over, hook this wall, and try to get out of there, then maybe your jungler was right here and he can rotate over and help you out, and maybe your mid laner can rotate down and help you out too. I mean, who knows? Maybe your ADC will even rotate up the river. So because you're tanky, you can survive a lot longer if you get caught out of position while you're warding, or just if someone engages on you in a team fight, all that kind of stuff. It makes you a lot more durable. Whereas if you were Zyra running up the river and you try to ward this spot and a jungler pops out of this bush, you're dead. Probably, because no one's going to have time to react. The jungler's not going to be able to get there in time. Mid laner's not going to be able to collapse and help. So if you pick a squishy champion and you get picked out of position, it's a lot less likely that your allies are going to be able to help you out. And finally, tanky champions lengthen team fights. So give your team more chances for plays. So, you know, if it's a bad engage, let's say you get hooked on, for example, and we'll go back to the map here. So let's say you're just trying to defend. Well, let's say this tower's down. This is a better example. This is something that happens all the time. Let's say you're right here, the wave is right here, and you have an ally that's coming up here. Maybe it's an Orianna or something that just wants to get some of this farm, but you don't have any of this warded over here. So she goes up here. She gets engaged on by a bunch of people. You're sitting right here as Nautilus. You go in, you hook, engage, you're trying to peel them. Your AD carry, instead of trying to help push the wave up here, has decided, you know, she wants to go get red buff down here. So if you're Nautilus, you can engage, peel off this Orianna, get into a fight, and you might give your AD carry time to come from over here to over here, because it might take them 10 to 15 seconds to kill you. And maybe your jungler was over here trying to ward Baron, and then he's going to be able to rotate down and help you. So once again, just extending fights gives your teammates time to start making the right decisions a lot of time. So good tanky champions, things like Nautilus, Malachi, Poppy, Hecarim. Okay, high damage champions. How long is this going? I don't want this to be too long. Okay, it's going. We're going at a pretty good pace. High damage champions. This is something that doesn't really need that much explanation. If you have high burst champions, it doesn't give allies, or doesn't give enemies rather, time to recover. If you catch them out of position, so if the tables are turned and you have the people that are engaging on the Orianna, if you have enough damage, if you have something like a Graves or a Kled or something like that that runs out and just blows her up, it's not going to give them time for that AD carry who's doing red to rotate up and help them. So you want to close out fights quickly with damage if you're engaging on the enemy. Yeah, it also, if you have very high sustained damage, it forces the enemy to have really good engage. So if you have something like a Rise or a Cassiopeia, a Twitch, a Vayne, they have to go kill that person or they're going to lose the fight. So if you have superior high sustained damage, it forces them to make the moves to kill you or they're going to lose. High sustained AD damage, so something like a Yasuo, a Riven, a Kled. High AD damage helps you take towers and helps you take things like Baron really quickly too, so that's an extra bonus if it's sustained AD damage. I mean, obviously the AD carry has sustained AD damage, most AD carries. But if you have other champions that can do that as well, Master Yi would be another one, or Fiora, then it makes it even easier to take objectives. So good examples of persistent damage champions would be like very high damage champions would be like Rise, Cassiopeia, Riven, Katarina, Graves. High mobility. So high mobility just helps you reposition, it helps you rotate, it helps you be in the place that you need to be to make plays happen and to get out of bad situations. So good examples of champions with high mobility would be like Ahri, Ezreal, Kassadin, Twisted Fate, Nocturne, Karma. Reliable execution. So this is not the sexiest concept, but it's something that's really important to think about. Like, it's going to be chaotic. Your teammates are not going to know what's going on a lot of the time. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to be out of position. And you're going to make mistakes too, right? So as you climb, as you're learning things, you're going to make mistakes. So being on a champion where it's very difficult to make mistakes helps you out. And it's not just that you're taking the easy way out, right? It's not just saying, oh, I have to play easy champions because I'm a bad player. I have to play, you know, Nautilus, a press R champ because I'm a bad player. No, what it does is it frees you up. It frees up your mental abilities so that you can actually watch the mini-map and make good decisions. So if you're playing a very high mechanical champion that requires all of your concentration, so let's say you're playing Yasuo top lane, and you really, really have to focus on every single, like, minute movement of the enemy to decide when you're going to go in and make a trade and when you're going to go back out, there's a high probability you're going to be more prone to getting ganked because you're not going to be able to watch the mini-map as much because you're going to have to focus so hard on trying to win that 1v1 matchup because it's such a mechanically intense champion. Or not only will you get ganked, but you're not going to be able to ping other lanes. So you're not going to be looking at your mini to see, oh, someone's walking on a ward right here around blue buff, so I need to ping question mark so that the bottom lane knows that someone's at that ward. Now, should the bottom lane know that? Should they know there's someone there because they're on a ward? Yes, of course. But will they? Who knows? We don't know. But if you ping it, they're much more likely to know. So even if you're playing something like Yasuo top lane, if you see someone on a ward in bottom lane, it's your responsibility to ping that. You have to take ownership of that. Just because it's not on your side of the map doesn't mean that you're not responsible for pinging it. If you truly want to climb Elo, you need to be watching that mini-map like a hawk and pinging everything that's good information. So if you see the jungler anywhere on the map, you need to ping it. If mid laner's missing, you need to ping it. Don't rely on the mid laner to ping it if the mid laner's missing. So they may not do it, right? And that's your responsibility too. You can look at the map, you can see that the mid laner is missing, and you can ping it. So yeah, it's like you're not directly at fault for not doing that, but that's something that you could be doing to win the game. And it's really important to do everything that you can possibly do to win the game. You have to take responsibility for your entire team, not just winning your own lane, not just going up in CS and killing people, but making sure the entire team wins the game. And so if you play a champion that has very reliable execution, aka does not require high mechanical skill, then that makes it more likely that you're going to be able to pay attention to the minimap, pay attention to the game state, think critically, okay, should we fight here, make shot calls, because you're going to have that extra mental capacity free to pay attention to that. Now, of course, really high-level players can play something like Yasuo and watch their minimap like a hawk, but the vast majority of people, especially if you're trying to climb, if you're kind of in a lower elo, need to have that extra mental power to watch the minimap. So if you're the kind of person that's like, I really have a hard time watching the minimap, I don't spot ganks easily, I get caught out a lot, that type of stuff, play a champion that's more reliable, that doesn't require as much brain power in terms of their micro movements, so that you can pay attention to the macro game even more. So good champions for this are Vi, Malzahar, Nautilus. Very straightforward, press R ultimates, very clear what they do in fights. There's not a ton of really intricate decision making there. With someone like Nautilus, you have to choose who to peel and who you use your ultimate on and stuff like that in team fights. But in general, he's pretty straightforward. Whereas someone like Yasuo or Lee Sin or Cassiopeia, all of these require a lot more attention, skill shots, things like that. Okay. And finally, great scaling. You need to pick great scaling champions, because if you have great scaling, even if you make some mistakes early on, you can still win the game in the long run. So, and I'm going to tell you exactly what scaling means, because people ask me all the time, what does scaling mean? So I'm going to describe that separately here, but just trust me, you want scaling champions. This is Twitch, Vayne, Hecarim, Irelia, Rise. That way, if you fall behind in the early game, you're down kills, you can come back and win the game because you have scaling. So two qualities that are good in pro games that I don't recommend for solo queue are split pushing and poking. So with split pushing, it adds extra pressure to the map to help you take objectives. It can help against teams that have superior team fighting to you. But it's a huge problem in solo queue, because it's very dangerous without good macro knowledge, not only for you, but for your teammates. So maybe you know how to ward when you're split pushing and not get caught out and not die, which is rare. I'll tell you, most split pushers don't, that I see in solo queue, but some people do. Even if you ward for yourself and you don't get caught out, are you really willing to put the game on the line that none of your 4 allies are going to get caught out while you're split pushing? Are you willing to do that? I wouldn't. I wouldn't bet on that, because I would say there's a very high probability that of those 4 people, at least one person is going to be out of position and get caught out. So it's really like your team is going to be in a 4v5 situation, and it's going to be bad. So, and splitting requires good warding and communication, like I just said before. So if you're really powerful, you're on a good split pusher, you have teleport available, and you know how to use it correctly, then split pushing can be very, very powerful. But all of these things take a lot of skill and a lot of game knowledge to use correctly, and I just don't recommend trying to win like that. Like, people that are in Diamond or Challenger that boost accounts and things like that, or they're just playing on their Smurfs and boosting, yes, they can play things like Trundle and win games because they have that great game knowledge for splitting. They have the teleport and stuff like that. But normal people that are at their appropriate elo have a hard time with this. Okay, poking is another one. I don't recommend poke champions. They can be good. So like a late game Jace. Nidalee used to be poke, but she's not used that much anymore. Ziggs. I mean, these things can be good, but it requires really good positioning for your team. So once again, do you want to sit there when you're playing Lux or when you're playing Ziggs and just tell your team, hold on, don't fight, let me get a couple of good hits in with some bombs, or let me hit one of these snares? Are they going to do that? Maybe. But really, can you count on those other 4 people to not get into a fight when you're sitting there trying to do that? I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't bank on it. So It also opens you up to flanks. So if they have something like a Kha'Zix and you're just trying to sit there and poke them underneath their tower, and Kha'Zix comes around and flanks you from behind, or a Hecarim or something, or a Vi, it's going to be a hard time. So I don't recommend poke champs or split pushing champs. They can be good in the right situation. I just think that you're potentially handicapping yourself in solo queue by doing that. So the best champions for solo queue will have at least 2 of these qualities: great crowd control, tanky, high damage, high mobility, simple execution, great scaling. Many of the best ones will have multiple. So look at someone like Hecarim, for example. He has crowd control with his ultimate. Not a lot, but it's enough. He's very tanky later in the game. He has high damage. He's really fast. He's very easy to play, and he has great scaling. So he literally catches all of those qualities. Every single one of them is Hecarim. And that's why he's probably the most powerful champion on the current patch for solo queue. Vi also meets a lot of these. Has a lot of crowd control with her ultimate. Very easy to use. Tanky, high damage, high mobility, very simple. Irelia, not as much crowd control, but similar concept. Rise, similar concept. Syndra, not tanky, but extremely high damage to make up for that. Not super high mobility, but, you know, all of these champions don't have all of those qualities. Vi and Hecarim do, but a lot of these champions have at least multiple of these qualities. Okay, so why is scaling so important? So I just mentioned scaling, and people ask me, well, what is scaling? Why is scaling important? Okay, scaling means that a champion becomes stronger the longer the game goes on. And this can be for a variety of reasons, but it's just in general, they outpace a lot of other champions in the game as the game progresses. So here's a couple of ways that a champion can scale. So the champion gains more damage through very high ratios on their abilities. So let me look here. I'll show you what I'm talking about at League with Kia here. Okay, so high ratios is one way to do it. So let's look at, I think Syndra has pretty high ratios. Yes. Okay, so look at her ratios. So this is 75% on her Q. That means that if you get 100 AP, you're getting 75 damage out of that 100 AP. She has an 80% ratio on her W, so you're getting 80 damage out of 100. And then her ultimate is 20% per ball. And if you're playing her correctly, you can usually hit at least 5 balls on them, if not more. So, you know, that's 100% AP ratio. So that is a massive, massive ratio. This is why Syndra does so much damage. Part of it is because she scales extremely well with AP. Let's look at who's someone that would have like a low ratio. Let's look at someone like Lulu middle. Something like that. So she only has a 50% AP ratio. So that means if you have built 100 AP on her, you would only get 50 AP out of that. She has no ratio on her W. She has, if you're doing the damage portion, she has a 40 ratio. She would only get 40 extra damage for having 100 ability power. And her ultimate only has a 50% ratio. So she has terrible ratios. You're not getting nearly as much. Syndra, so if you had the same amount of AP, if you bought a death cap, Syndra's going to do like double the extra bonus damage from her ratios because they're so high. So if you pick champions that have really high ratios like that, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage. Here's another champion that sometimes played mid lane without much ratio. Someone like Karma. I don't know. You can look it up and see for yourself, but there are champions that have much, much higher ratios than others. I think Annie's are pretty high. Ahri may not be that high, but I haven't looked at Ahri in a while. Ahri's are pretty decent. It's difficult to tell because her spells can have multiple hits. That's tough to calculate. Just in general, just look. If they have a 70% or higher, that's going to be really good scaling later into the game. Because a lot of champions have 60% or lower. Okay, so the Champions kit synergizes very well with expensive items. So they perform very well with very expensive items. So if they need a lot of money to be very powerful later into the game, the later the game goes, the more money they get. So they become more powerful. So an example is champions that use Infinity Edge plus Hurricane. such as Caitlyn or Twitch or whatever. They're going to be very good later into the game. Infinity Edge is very expensive. Hurricane's pretty expensive. But if they actually get those items, then they're going to be super powerful. Or someone like Jax who wants to go Trinity Force Gunblade first. They're going to need a lot of gold for that. So as the game goes on, they're going to be a lot stronger, but they're going to be weaker while they're building those items. Whereas other champions that, maybe build a Sunfire Cape would be better a lot earlier against someone like Jax. But once he gets his big items, then he's going to be a lot strong later. So there are items that are cheaper that aren't quite as strong and items that are more expensive and are stronger. So if people opt for the stronger items, then they need more time to do that. But if they get them, then they're going to be stronger than the smaller items. Okay, the champion kit adds multiple multipliers to the damage output. So, for example, AD carries, a lot of the best AD carries have some kind of modifier built into their kit that gives them extra damage over time. So, for example, let's look at Twitch. Classic powerhouse on the current patch. What are some things that make him so strong? Well, his skills synergize. So, for example, look at this. He gets extra bonus attack speed for 5 seconds after he pops out of stealth. So when he maxes out his stealth, as he gets more levels, he's going to get more damage because it adds on the extra multipliers. So that extra attack speed scales with AD damage because the more you hit them, obviously, the more damage you're going to do with that AD. Also, it scales with crit because the more you hit them, the more chances you have to crit. It also scales with stacking up his poison, which can deal quite a lot of pure damage. And his ultimate gives bonus AD, which also scales with the rest of his kit that I just described. And it can hit multiple people, which also scales with everything I just applied. And it applies on hit effects. So once he gets Hurricane, then it applies all of the Hurricane strikes on everything as well. So I think, either way, 2 things in his kit, his Spray and Pray and his Q, both amplify the damage that he gets from items. So because his skills amplify his damage, then he scales very well over time. Versus, let's look at someone like Corki. Where's old Corki here? Just saw him a second. There we go. Look at Corki, who doesn't scale very well later into the game. So you might be wondering, well, why isn't Corki very good later into the game? Because he doesn't have anything that increases his attack speed or his critical strike or that gives him free AD. That's why. So he doesn't, if he gets an Infinity Edge and a Hurricane, it's not going to be very good on him because he doesn't have skills that amplify the damage. What he does have is abilities, magic power abilities, that do a lot of damage early on in the game. They have terrible scaling. It's only 50% bonus AD, or 20% bonus AP. So it has pretty bad ratios, but he is very strong in the mid game once he gets a Trinity Force because he has easy ways to proc the Trinity Force off of his bombs. So he's very good in the middle game once he gets that one Trinity Force item. He can just start blowing people up because he can constantly proc Trinity Force by spamming his missiles. So that's why he's good in the early and mid game, but he's worse in the late game because he doesn't have any of those extra modifiers. He doesn't scale like Twitch scales with those modifiers. Vayne, for example, let's look at Vayne, another classic scaler, and then I'll move on to the next point. Just to sort of show you, if you've ever wondered why Vayne is so powerful, why Twitch are so powerful, there we go. This is why, because they have this scaling. Okay, so it's 50% of her total AD. So the more AD she has, she gets a bonus on her hits whenever she rolls. It can also critically strike. So if she gets critical strike modifiers like Infinity Edge, then it's going to be even more powerful. So the tumble scales with crit, and it gives your normal AD, or it gives your normal attacks even more damage. Also, her silver bolts. Whenever she gets more attack speed, she has she stacks up those silver bolts even faster, so they proc more. And her final hour gives you bonus AD, which once again scales with crit and scales with attack speed. So she has 3 different abilities. Her Q, her W, and her ultimate all scale with the items she's going to get. They amplify each other. So that's why she's so ridiculously powerful later in the game compared to something like Corki or Urgot or Sivir, something like that. That's why they're so strong. Okay, another way that a champion can scale is if they become extremely difficult to kill through their items and through their kit. So for example, Poppy Nautilus, and Maokai. If you've ever wondered, well, why are these champions just so impossible to kill? Well, let's go take a look really quick. Let's look at Poppy. Where's old Pop here? There we go. Sorry, I haven't looked at this in a while. And they keep changing around all the artwork. So her passive is a major reason. So she throws her buckler, and then when she picks it up, she gets magic damage, and she shields herself for 20%, up to 20% of her maximum health. So the more health that she gets a bigger shield. So once she gets more tank items like the Sunfire Cape or Spirit Visage, things like that, she gets a bunch of health, then she gets even more of a shield off of this. And as she gets more resistances, so as she gets more armor and magic resist, then it takes enemies even longer to cut through that shield. Because if she has a 500 shield and she has 100 armor, enemy doesn't have any armor penetration, it's going to take 1,000 damage to cut through that shield. If you want to know how shields and resistances work, check out my itemization video. I go into that a lot on the same channel. Just look for the itemization guide and I'll explain that more. But just know that resistances, if you have those plus shields, it makes it extremely difficult to kill champions. There was another thing in here. Is it her ultimate? There's something. It's like stubborn to a fault. Oh, here we go. So her total armor and magic resist are both increased by 15% up to 30% when she goes below 40% health. So she gets an extra 30% on all of her resistances. So when she, has 100 armor, then all of a sudden she gets 40 extra armor. So that means it's going to take, if her resistances are doubled to 30%, then, that means it's going to take a lot more damage to kill her. So the 30% extra resistances on top of all this extra shield that she gets means that it's extremely difficult to cut through Poppy in the late game. So that's why it seems like it's impossible to kill her, is because her skill set really amplifies the tankiness of all of these items. Okay. And finally, the champion excels at creating map pressure and taking objectives. This is another way of scaling. So if they're very good at taking Dragon, or they're very good at taking Baron, or they're very good at taking towers, for example, then they're going to scale much later into the game. Now, a lot of times this is because of damage, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just raw damage. It could be, something to the effect of like Ziggs, for example. He can use his W to take towers. That's a way that he scales in the game because he takes towers really quickly by blowing them up. Master Yi is very fast and very pesky, for example. He can rotate around and take towers quickly, as can Trundle. So that's a form of scaling, that they can rotate around and make plays on the map very quickly. Twisted Fate, for example, or Rengar or Nocturne, they can catch people out because they have these highly mobile moves. They can jump around to different people. So these are all different ways of scaling. Okay, so let's think. How long is this? It's getting kind of long. So I want to finish up here in just a second. I just want to go over a couple of top picks for support. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go over everything here. I am going to do another tier list once 7.1 comes out, probably in about a week or so. But in general, here are some of the best supports and their best matchups. So Janna. So she has great CC, great scaling, reliable execution, high mobility. Her shields get bigger and it gives plus 40 AD, which is extra damage that scales with critical strike, attack speed, abilities, all that good stuff on the AD carry. That's why she scales so much harder than most other shield champions, is because she gives them that free 40 AD. That's like giving them 1,200 gold for free as the game rolls out without taking up an item slot. Okay, so you pick her because she's great at saving multiple people in really wild situations. She's good at tower defense and tower offense because she can shield towers, and the extra AD that she gives out helps people take towers faster. She has an extremely versatile build. She doesn't have to build any specific items to be useful. So, you can build anything from ZZ Rot to Ardent Sensor to the standard Locket Redemption if you want to. She does, however, have a lot of problems if the enemy team scales much better. So if they have a Twitch or a Vayne and you have something like a Corki on your team and you pick Janna, it's going to be a really hard time because you're not going to be able to engage and get on that Twitch and get on that Vayne and make a play to kill them. So she's good if your team scales better, but she's pretty bad if the enemy team scales better. So you want to pick her if you have high scaling champions. So if you have Caitlyn, you have Vayne, you have Twitch or Jinx, something like that, she's a great pick. She's very good if the enemy has assassins like Lee Sin, Kha'Zix, Riven, Rengar, because you can protect people, knock all of those people back, really nullify a lot of what they want to do. If the enemy team, or if your team already has plenty of damage, so if you don't need more damage. So if you have, you know, a Yasuo, a Twitch, and a Syndra on your team, you don't need any extra damage. So it's a really good time to pick something like a Janna. If you don't know much about the enemy team, it's a good time to pick Janna because she is pretty good into most comps. Yes, she does have a problem with killing Twitch and Vayne, but your teammates can do that if they have to sometimes later in the game. So she's a really safe pick if you're first or second pick and you don't know a lot about the enemy team. All right, so you want to avoid Janna if the enemy team has higher scaling, if your team doesn't have much damage. Those are two situations where you don't really want to pick Janna. So she's particularly good with Caitlyn, Jinx, Vayne, Twitch, Yasuo, Kha'Zix, and Riven. She's good against Lee, Kha'Zix, Yi, Yasuo, Yi again, Leona. And she's weak against Caitlyn, Jinx, Twitch, Vayne, Ryze, Cassiopeia, Soraka, Sona. So things that scale really well, or things that can just win the game on their own, like a Soraka, if you don't have a way to get on them and kill them. Because Soraka will outscale you later in the game if you're Janna. Okay, Nautilus. Another great champion. This is probably the #1 champion that I recommend for the vast majority of people who want to gain a lot of free elo. So why? Well, he has great CC, he has great engage, he's very tanky, he's very reliable, and he has pretty decent, respectable damage in a lot of fights. You can almost 2v1 most bottom lanes by yourself early in the game, just spamming your E and just auto-attacking people. He's extremely strong. So he has the most crowd control in the game. He has 4 different abilities. 3 of them are stuns. 1 of them is an AoE slow, and the other one is a very strong shield. So awesome kit. He's excellent at initiation. He can hook people, and if you miss the hook, you can still press R. So you have 2 different ways to initiate, which is very rare. Most champions just have 1. 1 or 2. I guess 2 is about par for the course for really good ones like Hecarim and Vi, but he's up there. He's really, really good at initiating. He's great against mobile champions because they can't get away from your R. You know, you can press R on Riven, and as much as she wants to run, or LeBlanc, it's going to hit her. She can't get away from it. Very good at small-scale skirmishes. So because you have so much crowd control and decent damage, you know, if a fight breaks out, it's all 2v2, 3v3, you know, 2v3 on your side, it's not in your favor, he's very good at that. He's very, very hard to kill. So when would you pick him? So if Vayne or Twitch are available to the enemy, I highly recommend picking him because he has a pretty good solution to both of those. If your team doesn't have a lot of crowd control, if your team doesn't have a tank, very common these days to see something like a Lee Sin jungler who's going to build all AD and a Riven top, for example. And if you don't pick a tank and support, your team's just not going to have a tank. Now, you don't always have to have a tank to win, but it's very helpful for the reasons I described above. It just gives your team a bit more time to make the right decisions. If your team already has a lot of damage, you don't need a damage champion. He's good. Although, like I said, he deals decent damage. If you don't know a lot about the enemy, he's a good pick too. He's very safe. There are things like he's not excellent into Yasuo, Morgana, Tahm Kench, or Braum because they can all have ways to block his missile. But overall, he's still okay into those champions. Even if you have a bad matchup bottom lane, because his roaming is so good, you can just roam up and affect mid lane. So it'll happen sometimes where someone picks Morgana into Nautilus bottom lane, and they're like, ha ha ha, now he's not going to be able to ultimate anyone. It's like, okay, what happens if I rotate middle and just sit on that Ziggs that's middle lane with my ultimate? So he's very flexible, so don't be scared if they pick a, you know, you obviously want to consider that if they have already picked Morgana, but it's not, or something like that, but it's not the end of the world if, you know, you pick Nautilus and then they pick Morg, because you can roam and make other plays. He's pretty good if the enemy has long-range champions like Ziggs, Xerath, Lux, and you need to get to them and fight them because his hook has a pretty long range. You can start a fight. So he's good with Ezreal. He's good with Caitlyn, Jhin, Ashe, Yasuo, and Vi. He's good against Twitch, Vayne, Lux, Syndra, and Jinx. And he's weak against Trundle, Caitlyn. Caitlyn's very annoying because if you try to engage on her and there's a trap that's like in your line on the way to her, then it's going to stun you. So Caitlyn is very, very annoying for Yasuo to deal with. for Nautilus to deal with. So Trundle, Kate, Yasuo is good against him because of Wind Wall. Braum's good with the shield. Morgan's good with her shield. Tahm Kench can eat the person you try to ult. Zillion can ultimate the person you try to blow up. And Kindred can save the person you try to blow up as well. So all of these champions aren't good news for Nautilus, but he can overcome it. He's really, really strong, so I highly recommend him. All right, Malzahar is another champion that I highly recommend right now. I just started playing him as support. He's amazing. One of his biggest drawbacks is that enemies, or allies rather, will think that you're trolling. So you need to explain to them that it's a legit support and that you have practiced it and it's going to be really good in the current matchup. And he can be excellent. So he has really good CC with his ultimate. He has good engage. He's reliable. He has really, really high damage. Like, you can just about 1v2 the enemy by yourself at level 1 with your critters. Like, no exaggeration. Like, I've done that in several games. Not exactly that, but pretty dang close. Like, you can get a level 1 kill with him. Those critters do a lot of damage. Watch my Malzahar guide if you want to know more about that, or my Malzahar playlist. You can, so very high damage. The spell shield that he gets every so often makes you very safe against hooks. So he's very good into Blitzcrank. He's very good into Thresh. He's pretty good into Nautilus. Lux. So he's very good at things that want to poke and try to blow you up. He's very versatile. So you can build like a damage build with Rylai's Leandries, or you can go the Redemption Locket build. Very, very flexible in what he wants to do, depending on if you need the damage or you want more utility. He's excellent against assassins. Akali tries to jump on you, Yasuo tries to come in and do something to you, you just press R, boom, he's going to die. He's great at the Clown Fiesta. He is the Grandmaster Clown because you can just pick people off just left and right, and it has a very, very low cooldown on his ult. So he's super powerful. He's very good if the enemy has Twitch or Vayne. In most elos, people just don't buy Quicksilver Sash. So that makes him excellent against them. If your team lacks CC, if you need a way to just lock down assassins, he's excellent. If your team lacks damage, he can put out a ton of damage, even as a support role. Even if you build Redemption Locket, he still does a lot of damage. If you don't know much about the enemy team, he's still a good pick, because the stuff that's good against him, like poke champions, just aren't super popular right now. And he's great if the enemy has assassins. So he's great with Ezreal, Kate, Lux, Jhin, Ashe, and Vi. So Ezreal and Kate are both very safe champions. That lets you roam, make plays on middle. They're probably not going to die while you roam. Ezreal's particularly good because if you ult them, that lets him hit them for free with his ult, which does obviously a ton of damage. So that's very powerful. Kate can, if you ult him, she can put a trap on him, chain it together that way. If you have a Lux in the middle, if you ult him, that lets Lux do her full combo to him and kill him. Jhin, if Jhin hits him with a W in lane, while your critters are running after him, that's pretty much going to be instant death if it's level 2, unless they're going to have to flash out of it for sure, and maybe heal as well. Ashe, she hits him with an arrow, you hit him with your ult, or you hit him with your ult, she hits him with an arrow, lots of combos. Same thing with Vi. Just great at chaining CC together. So he's excellent against Vayne, Twitch, Kha'Zix, Riven, Yasuo, Kassadin, and Ahri. He's weak against Caitlyn, Ezreal, Ziggs, Lux, Jace, and Zyra. So very long-range things that can stay out of his ult range. He's not that great into those, but he's good into everything else. Okay, Tahm Kench, another excellent. So he has great peel. He's very durable, high mobility, high damage to tanks. Excellent all-in damage. He's very tanky. He's great at nullifying enemy crowd control. He's excellent at roaming with his ultimate. He's very good at skirmishing. So you want to pick him if the enemy has very heavy CC, if your team needs a tank, or if the enemy team does not have access to Vayne or Twitch. So if they can get Vayne or Twitch, do not pick Tahm Kench. He's really bad in that environment. He's very good with Ezreal, Jhin, Jinx, Caitlyn, and Ashe. He's good against Thresh, Leona, Vi, Nautilus, and Lux. Anything that needs that hard lock CC. So he's weak against Vayne, Twitch, Ryze, Kha'Zix, Hecarim. Things that do very high, persistent damage. Okay, Soraka, extremely powerful, great healing, great scaling, very reliable. She's going to win the game. She's a champion that will win the game if they don't kill her, most likely. Because she scales extremely well with the plus healing item. She has 3 different heals, including her self-heal off of her Q. So you want to pick her. She's very much you pick her if the enemy does not have things, rather than you pick her to help out your own team, because she's good with almost anything. It's just a question of whether or not they can get to her and kill her. So if the enemy doesn't have assassins, or if the enemy doesn't have a lot of hard engaged champions, or if the enemy just overall has very low damage with their composition, then she's going to be unstoppable. So she is very, very powerful in the right circumstances. So she's great with Ezreal and Caitlyn specifically because they're very safe. They don't need a lot of peel. They can kind of take care of themselves because Soraka doesn't have much peel. She just has healing. She's excellent against poke. So if they're trying to do something like Ziggs, she just completely takes Ziggs out of the game, basically. She can heal through almost anything. So she's great against everything except for crowd control, burst, high engaged champions. So that makes her weak against Hecarim, Vi, LeBlanc, Syndra, Kha'Zix, Tryndamere. Now Tryndamere, because you don't have a way to run him down or kill him or CC him or anything like that. And so against heavy split push champions, she's not going to be that excellent. She's great at team fights. She doesn't want the Clown Fiesta. She wants your team to group up and siege towers. All right, just have a few more here, and that's going to be the end of the video. So we've got Zyra. So excellent damage, some CC, reliable execution. So she has very aggressive laning, lots of kill potential, good and organized, late game fights, good at counter engagements, good at bursting people in the mid to late game. So she's great with Jhin, Lucian, and MF because they can kill people in lane. If she lands a root, they're going to die in lane, most likely, if you're doing it correctly. So, and I have had people, I'll make a special Zyra video, but people are just like, oh, why do you do double melee plants with Zyra? Why don't you do E, W to put a plant on them and then do a Q and then get a ranged plant on them? The reason is, if you put 2 melee plants on them, they're going to spawn instantly, and your plant's going to get one more hit, at least one more, if not 2 more hits. By the time you press Q and put that other plant up there and get a ranged plant over there, you're going to lose 1 hit, if not 2 hits on that plant. So yeah, you're going to have a ranged plant, but who cares if they flash out of it after the root's done, or they dash out of it if they're Ezreal or whatever. Like, the whole point is you want to do maximum damage possible before they flash out of it. And if you have to waste time and wait for your Q to proc and work in 1 more spell rotation there, then you're not going to have time for it. Especially if you're trying to get your ult off. So as soon as you hit them with that root and the 2 melee plants and you ult, then your ult will probably be able to go off and knock them up in the air before they're able to dash out of it. But if you E, put 1 plant up and then try to Q, put another plant up and then ult, they're probably going to be able to break out of it before your ult actually knocks them up. So that's why you do the double melee plant, because you want the maximum number of hits. I mean, the range on the melee plant is still pretty decent. I think it's like 200 range or something, so it can still hit people a good distance. But it's much, much more important to get those plants down and get your ultimate off. So that's why. It's not because I'm a noob, it's not because I'm a bronze Zyra player, it's because I think critically about Zyra. I've almost gotten to Diamond only playing Zyra. In Season 3, I had like 400 Zyra games. So I've played a lot of Zyra. So that's conceptually why you want to go for the 2 melee plants, because you just may not have time to get your Q off and knock them up with your ultimate. Okay, sorry for that aside. There's always people that ask that every time I play Zyra. For some reason, every time I play Zyra, everyone thinks they're an expert on Zyra too, and just has a lot of stuff to say about it. And I don't mind input, but people get really sassy about Zyra for some reason. I don't know. But anyways, I just wanted to clarify that. So she's good with Jhin, Lucian, and Misfortune. She's good against lanes without sustain and squishy champions. And so she's very good at things like Lulu, Karma, Janna. She's very good at those type of lanes. She's weak against tanks, poke, and healing later in the game. So you need to close out the game early when you pick Zyra, because once those tanks get a couple of items, and that's all you're going to be able to hit on the front line in team fights, she's not going to have a lot of use. Because you're not going to be able to get to that back line and hit the AD carry or the mage without the tank beating you up. So she has a big problem as support if the tanks get 2 items and they start forming up in team fights. It can be a big deal. So you really have to smash your lane early and just transition and try to close out the game before 30 minutes. Okay, Trundle. Trundle can be very good against tanks. So he has great durability, has really good all-ins, he has unique crowd control. He has really high mobility, tank breaking. He's excellent against mega tanks. So Poppy, Maokai, and Nautilus, because his ultimate steals a lot of their stats, makes it possible for your allies to kill them. He's great at setting up skill shots. So if you have a Lux on your team, he's really good at that because you just drop the pillar. It slows them down a lot, forces them to move in a certain direction, makes it really easy for Lux or Morgana or all kinds of skill shot reliant champions to actually hit the abilities while the person is slowed. It's great. You're great at engaging or disengaging with pillars. You can start fights. You can stop fights. You can cancel things like a Katarina ult. You can cancel a Jen ult who's channeling. You can cancel Xerath ult. So you can do a lot of good things with that pillar. I mean, if you're good enough with it, you can stop mobility things. So if Lee Sin's trying to dash in with his Q on somebody, you can actually knock him out of the air with the pillar. Or if Nautilus hooks somebody, you can actually put a pillar between him and the person that he hooked, and it'll stop him from getting to him. So there's a lot of really intricate, tricky things you can do if you're a world-class Trundle player. But even if you're just a decent Trundle player, he still is quite strong. He does pretty good damage in fights, too, with his chomp and persistent things, especially if you get like a Frozen Fist or something like that. He can be quite strong. Okay, so he's really good with Ezreal and Caitlyn. Once again, they don't need a lot of peel. They're very safe champions. They're two of my favorite overall AD carries. He's good against Maokai, Poppy, Nautilus, Hecarim, Gnar, Irelia. Things that get very tanky, that don't have a lot of good ways to get around the pillar. He's very weak against LeBlanc, Kha'Zix, and other assassins that can get on your champions and kill them, because you just don't have a lot of peel, you don't have a lot of shields, all you have is your pillar. So if they can jump around it, it's not going to be a good time. Okay, last couple. We have Nami, so great trading in lane, great healing, good CC, excellent trading in lane. So you just keep spamming the W on them. It's really hard to trade back because you're dealing damage and you're healing yourself up the whole time. So she's excellent at that. That makes her really good at babysitting lanes for Twitch and Vayne. It's just really, really hard for people to do anything to those champions because you're just constantly harassing them. And if they do all in you, then you have the bubble to crowd control them and perhaps even turn it around and kill them. Has good synergy with champions that want to chase and kill enemies. Vayne, so he wants to run people down and kill them. Twitch, who wants to jump out and keep people slowed so they stay in his ult. So very, very good with those two champions in particular. And she can be great at disrupting long-range channels. So you can use your wave to stop a Xerath, stop a Jen, things like that. So that can be good, but keep in mind the wave moves very slow. So if you're trying to stop a Jen from ulting, for example, let's say he starts his ult, he gets one shot off, and then you throw your wave. By the time it actually hits him, he's going to get 2 more shots off. So yeah, you'll stop him from his 4th shot, probably, depending on how far back he is when he starts his ult. He might even be able to get all of the shots off before that wave gets there. So it sounds like it's really good in theory. Oh, you cancel Jen's ult, but it takes a while for that to happen. Same thing with Xerath. Xerath opens up to ult from a long distance away. Yeah, you can stop some of his ult, but he's still going to get off 2 or 3 shots, most likely. So, he's good with Twitch, with Vayne. She's good against Jen and Xerath for the reasons I just described, although it's limited effectiveness for the reasons I just described. And she's weak against Braum and Yasuo. They can stop her wave with different abilities they have. She's weak against Zyra. Zyra can blow her up in lane, LeBlanc, Kha'Zix, or other assassins she's kind of weak against. And finally, I have Lulu. I think Lulu can be very powerful in the right circumstances. So she has great CC, great trading in lane, decent scaling. One problem with her scaling is plus heal items aren't that great on her because it only affects her base shield. So her E shield, it does not affect her ultimate. So when you give people that bonus health, that's not a heal. It's just giving them health. So you don't get any scaling off of that. So that's why she doesn't scale as hard as someone like Janna or Soraka, who have multiple ways. So Janna has her ultimate and her shield, and Soraka has 3 different ways to benefit from the plus healing. So she doesn't scale quite as hard as those champions, but she's very good at trading in lane. And her shields, it's important to know that her shields are, I think, 650 range as well, whereas Janna's are 800 range. So that can be very relevant to have 25% more range on your shield. So she has great CC, all that other stuff. She's good at trading in lane. She's good against close range assassins. So, you know, anyone that tries to jump in and do some damage to you, you can critter them and maybe kill them. So this makes her good at persistent damage threats too. So things like if Cassiopeia or Ryze get close enough and you critter them, that can be a good way to shut them down for a couple of seconds. So people might actually be able to kill them. She's really, really good at nullifying single damage bursts. So if they have a, Mega Fed LeBlanc or Cassin or something, or a Fizz, and they try to go in, as soon as they're going to hit your champion, you just ult them, shield them. That gives them an effective bonus of like 900 health or something later in the game, and it makes it really, really hard to kill them. And it knocks them up, of course. So that's really, really good later on in the game. You can use that as initiation, too. So if someone like Shyvana jumps in, you can knock them up from a distance with your ultimate as well. So it has a lot of utility to it. She's great at speeding up allies. This is one thing that Janna can't do. So if you have something like a Shyvana on your team, or an Olaf, or a Darius, just all kinds of things that their main problem is they can get kited. If you speed them up, problem solved. And so it makes them very, very effective. She's really, really good, especially with Shyvana, who's becoming very popular right now. And she's great if your team has superior scaling. So if you don't need any extra scaling on your team, if you don't need any extra damage, she's awesome. So she's great with Yasuo. Obviously, that knock up from the ultimate. Like Shyvana jumps in, you ultimate Shyvana, knock up 3 people, Yasuo ults, living the dream. So that can be very, very powerful with Yasuo, with that knock up. She's good with Vayne, she's good with Twitch, and she's good with Caitlyn, because she can babysit them all very, very well. So she's good against Assassins, she's good against Janna, because she has a bit more utility than Janna, although she doesn't scale with the AD as much. So if Janna is like backing up a Twitch, you're going to have a problem. But if it's like Janna, Ezreal, and you have like a Lulu Twitch, then you're going to be the winner there. So she's weak against the high scalers. So the high ranged scalers. So Vayne, Twitch, Ryze, Cassiopeia. Because she has no way to really initiate and get on them. She can help your allies do that, but that's not as reliable as something like a Nautilus hook. Okay, and that's about it. Finally, I just made up a chart here just to try to help you out with these champions, know when to pick them. Basically just what I talked about, I just gave them a point system. So this is extremely rough, but it's stuff to think about when you should pick these champions, if you want to try to quantify it. So, Malzahar support, and whichever champion has the most points, that's the champion that you should probably pick for a given situation. So, let's say Malzahar support, +2 points if you're an early pick with no information, +1 if the enemy has a short range scaling champion, so like a short range assassin, +1 if your team has low damage and you need more damage, +1 if your team has Ezreal, so that lets you roam, so that's really powerful, +1 if the enemy team has no poke champions, because that's what Malzahar is weak against, +1 if the enemy team doesn't have a lot of crowd control, because once again, that's something that Malzahar would be weak against. Janna, +2 if you're an early pick, because she's good in most compositions, +1 if you have the higher scaling AD carry, +1 if you have an additional AD threat, so you have a Kha'Zix, you have a Ribbon, something else that can benefit from her shield AD that she gives. +1 if the enemy has a priority engager, so if they have a Hecarim, a Vi, something else is going to try to dive you. She's really good at peeling that off. +1 if your team has an engaged champion, so if you don't need that engage, so if you have the Vi, if you have the Hecarim, it's also good. And +1 if you have a weak lane ADC. So I had to find that down here. So if you have a champion that's weak in lane, that's not going to be able to bully people out, she can be very good into that. So where did I put that here? So if you have a Twitch, Vayne, Easy, Sivir, or Tristana is very good. She still is pretty good with Jhin, Lucian, Kate, all of that stuff, but she's really good at babysitting weak lane ADCs as well. All right. Nautilus, once again, +2 if you have little information. So if you're first pick and you don't know anything about either team, I recommend picking one of these 3. +1 if you're an early pick and either Vayne or Twitch are available. So if the enemy could pick Twitch or Vayne, you need to pick either Malzahar or Nautilus, most likely. +1 if the enemy team has a higher scaling ADC and you need to engage on them. +1 if the enemy team has at least 1 priority scaler, so they have assassins or things that are really tough. So if you need to start fights and make sure they don't get to the end game, he's very good at that. +1 if you have a strong lane ADC. So if you can actually fight them early, so if you have a Jhin, a Lucian, Caitlyn, a Jinx, if you can get rowdy early on, get some kills, he's very, very good at starting fights and finishing them early on in the game. And +1 if you need an engaged champion and your team just doesn't have any. So top lane picks Riven, jungler picks Master Yi, and you need a way to get in there and fight, Nautilus is your choice. All right, Soraka, +2. So if the enemy team doesn't have any hard engage, like if they don't have any way to get to you on that back line, she's very, very strong. So +2 points for that. +1 if the enemy team has no assassins. +1 if your team has at least 2 tanks. Soraka thrives with tanks because her healing scales very well with resistances. So if you have a Maokai top lane and you have like a Nautilus in the jungle or a Hecarim in the jungle or something like that, it's going to be excellent with that plus healing. Bonus points if they get Spirit Visage, because that gives you even more healing whenever you heal them. +1 if the enemy team has a weak lane ADC, so if they can't really pressure you in lane, she's very strong against that. If it's just going to be a farm off, she loves that. +1 if your team has higher scaling ADC. What?
Oh, you got Miami colors going on.
That's right.
I like it.
+1 if you have Ezreal or Kate, because they're safe. Tahm Kench, +2 if the enemy team has 2 or more hard CC champions, so if they have Lux, Morgana, Nautilus, Vi, things like that that have kind of a long cooldown that you can or Ashe nullify with your ult. He's very strong. +1 if you're an early pick without much information. He's still pretty good in most matchups. +1 if your team has a priority engage champion, so if you don't need engage, he's very good. +1 if your AD carry is Jinx or Jhin. He's very, very good with them. He has lots of synergies with their kit. Anyone that he can eat and spit out on the back line and who can still be relevant is going to be very good with Tahm Kench. So with Jhin, for example, you spit him out on the back line, he can ultimate, finish up the fight. So you can get into a normal fight, do his thing, someone engages, tries to kill him, you eat him, run him to the back line, he ults, he's still very relevant. Same thing with Jinx. She can rocket from the back line, she can use her ultimate rocket from the back line, that is to say, and she can turn on her normal rockets and hit people from a long distance. So he's also good with Caitlyn and Ezreal as well, because they have long-range stuff that they can do from the back line. So he's not as good with someone like Vayne, because you eat him, spit him out on the back line, they have to get back into close range to do anything, they might get killed. Okay, if the enemy has a tank, he's also pretty good at breaking tanks. So Trundle is the ultimate tank breaker, so if they have Nautilus, that's an excellent reason to pick him. If they have Nautilus, I'll say or Poppy, because Poppy's becoming a real tear. We'll say Nautilus, Maokai, or Poppy, because they're all terrors right now. So he's very good against that. +1 if the enemy team has Hecarim, Nasus, or Darius, because he's pretty good against them, although not as good as he is against these picks. +1 if Ezreal is your AD carry. Ezreal, once again, if you haven't noticed, is really, really good in almost every composition. Ezreal and Caitlyn are both just excellent into everything. If you play the ADC role as your off role, those are your 2 champions you should be trying to get really good with right now. +1 if the enemy team doesn't have an assassin. +1 if your team has an engaged champion. Zyra, really good if your AD carry is Jhin or Ashe, or any other kind of early aggression person, Lucian, that type of stuff, because she wants to fight and kill people early. Anyone that has lots of crowd control, such as Ashe or Jhin as well. So if Jhin hits him with a W, you can hit him with the plants, or vice versa. Ashe, same deal with the arrow. You plant him, or she arrows them. Boom, they're going to die from all the abilities. Hi, Sadie. The cat just arrived. If you're against a weak lane ADC, so if they can't really punish you, if they can't fight you back, it's very good. ADCs that can't really move, she's also very good against that. So champions like Jhin, Draven, stuff like that. She's bad against Ezreal because it's really hard to pin him down. If you're against a squishy support like Sona or Nami or Karma, she's very good into those. If they can't really engage or kill you, she's very good into that. If the enemy doesn't have an assassin, she's good into that. If your team comp requires an early win. So if you don't have good scaling on your team, if it's something like, let's say you have a Pantheon top and a Corki in the middle, and your AD carry is Lucian or something like that, that's going to be a good pick, because you have to win before 30 minutes anyways because of your comp, so you might as well go all in on that. Nami, +2 if your AD carry is Vayne or Twitch, +1 if the enemy team does not have a priority engaged champion, +1 if the enemy team does not have an assassin. So basically, I just pick her if you have Vayne or Twitch and you need a babysitter in general, but these are things to consider about her. And Lulu, if the enemy team has Janna or Karma, Lulu is very good against them. If your team has Vayne or Twitch, pretty good with those two. If they have a burst assassin like an Akali, a LeBlanc, a Fizz, something like that, is very good. If your team already has Engage and doesn't need you to engage, that's very good. If your team has Yasuo, that's also very good. Okay, that is kind of defined down here what I mean by different high priority champions, different really good engagers, tanks, other 80 threats, and 80 scale power list. So if you're wondering which 80 carries scale harder than others, this is my rough list here of what I think scales, and then I define strong lane ADCs and weak lane ADCs here. Okay, so that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Is that about an hour? Yeah, it's about an hour. I was trying to do it faster, but these guides always end up being about an hour. So hope you enjoyed it. I know I couldn't cover everybody. I know there's people out there that love Sona, Poppy, Scion, Zach. There's all kinds of people that have suggested and they love these different kinds of champions. So I couldn't cover everybody. I just covered some of what I think are some of the strongest supports right now. But you know, if you want to know about other supports, just let me know in the comments. I can try to answer them there. But, you know, if I tried to cover every single support with the same level of depth, we'd have like a 3-hour video on our hands here. So I just covered kind of the main ones that I use a lot that I think are really powerful. But I can talk about the others if you want. Just let me know in the comments and I'm happy to help you out. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out the live stream sometime if you'd like. It starts at 8:30 Monday to Friday usually. And sometimes I do it on the weekends. And we also have other guides. Be sure to check them out, such as Mastering the Map, which is how to rotate, knowing when to rotate, knowing different game states and what you should do at different times. So everything kind of outside of the laning phase. I also have a laning phase video if you want to know how to trade, like what to do in different situations in the lane. And I have an itemization video if you want to know which items are really strong right now in different situations. Or if you want to know how resistances work, like how does armor really work? How does magic resist really work? I'll talk about that in that video. And I'm going to be coming up with a lot more guides as well very soon. I'm going to do individual guides for each of the major champions that I think are strong right now. And even some that aren't strong. I'll just do guides for every single support I can think of eventually. I do tier lists. And I want to start dipping my toe into other roles as well. So I want to do like a jungler macro guide, and I might do an 80 carry guide as well pretty soon. But stay tuned for all of that. We have a lot of great content on the channel. Check it out. And if you watch a bunch of stuff and you enjoy it, consider liking, subscribing, telling your friends about it. Anything you can do to you know, help support the channel. I greatly appreciate, because I know there's a lot of people out there that would enjoy the content that I provide. They just may not know that I exist yet. So anything that helps with that visibility, super cool. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you next time.